Good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to our Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana, and it's a pleasure for me to be here with you, an honor to have you here with me. It's very nice to see you all who are joining me live, and it is very nice to be seen by you who are joining in after the fact. And for those of you who are here with me live at this moment, if you'd be kind enough to hit the raise your hand button just to let me know that I can be heard. Very good. Thank you very much for letting me know. All right. Let us proceed with our usual bit of housekeeping. For those of you who are new to the satsang, you can adjust your audio settings and viewing options in the upper right-hand corner. You don't need to worry about your microphone or video camera because you can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you unless you make yourself heard by typing a question or comment into the Q&A box. So if you have any questions or comments, those of you who are here with me this evening, please let me know and I will keep my eyes on the Q&A box. And picking up where we left off from last week, we covered verses 8 through 11 of chapter 10, the Yoga of Divine Presence, or the Opulences of the Absolute, the 4 key verses of the Bhagavad-gita known as Chatur Shloki, the verses around which the entire rest of the Bhagavad-gita revolves. We spoke about the 3 categories of knowledge in the Vedic philosophical system: knowledge of relationships, knowledge of practices, and knowledge of the ultimate goal, though not necessarily in that traditional order. This evening, we move forward with going from bottom to top, verses 12 through 16, and I'm actually going to extend this out to verses 12 through 18 as Arjuna speaks for the first time in a couple of chapters. We'll talk a little bit about how not to understand the Bhagavad-gita and how our objective is to follow in Arjuna's footsteps. I promised you that we would look at Arjuna's faith-based questions this evening, but actually, they're not questions yet. They are requests. Arjuna, being enthralled by Krishna's presentation up to this point and having become kind of lost in hearing from Krishna as he describes himself, has been kind of swept right off the battlefield into the spiritual realm. And if we look back at our structure of Arjuna's transformation and how we see Arjuna's transformation being played out in the Bhagavad-gita, we can follow the story by considering how Arjuna begins in a state of material consciousness in the first 3 chapters. And then as Krishna gets rolling with his advice, Arjuna has doubts, and therefore doubt-based questions appear in chapters 4 through 9. Here in chapter 10, we find that Arjuna has arrived at a point of spiritual consciousness, which is to say that he has no further doubts. All of his doubts have been dispelled by Krishna at this point. And therefore, you can say that Arjuna has arrived at a state of spiritual consciousness. And he will be making requests and offering prayers and glorification of Krishna in that spiritual consciousness in chapters 10 and 11. Then, following chapter 11, once we get into chapter 12, we enter into that section of the Gita known as the section of Jnana Yoga, or the Yoga of Knowledge. And now, at this point, Arjuna will have faith-based questions as he inquires further as to the nature of the truth of relationships, the truth about practices, and the truth about the ultimate goal. He will arrive at a state of transcendental consciousness by the end of the 18th chapter. So here, where we are right now, spiritual consciousness in chapters 10 and 11. Okay. I'd like to introduce two keys to misunderstanding the Gita, along with a couple of, an example for each of these two keys. You've heard me speak about these two ways to misunderstand the Gita before, and I want to just provide you with a couple of concrete examples as they apply to the section of the chapter that we are learning about right now. So the first is mental speculation, and the second is an interpretive translation. So we'll take the interpretive translation first. I have an edition of the Gita that has what I would regard as an interpretive translation. Magically, well, it doesn't look too bad. Maybe I'll keep them. Earlier this week, I did an online seminar, and somehow or other I set up the lights perfectly so that there was no glare in my glasses. And at least in the small window, there doesn't appear to be too much glare right now. Maybe it's just because I've got the light set up just perfectly again, and there's not a lot of color on my screen. Let's see how long this lasts. Anyway, at least now, with my glasses on, I can read the verses from the edition of the Gita that I would like to share with you. So this is what I would regard as an interpretive translation that is based on mental speculation of verses 10 and 11, the second half of the Chatur Shloki, the 4 key verses. So these are the second of the second set, the verses 3 and 4 of the 4 key verses. We'll review the translation we looked at last week in just a moment for comparison's sake. To those who give me their whole hearts, Krishna is speaking, I confer buddhi, beyond worldly intellect, the power of discriminating between the real and the not real. As familiarity with my power and glory grows, they are ever more ardently drawn to me. I am their wisdom, Arjuna. Out of compassion, I choose to dwell in their hearts, and from there I dispel dark ignorance with the light of knowing that they are the divinity within. Now, did you notice the super sharp left turn that was taken right at the very end? We have Krishna speaking, and he is speaking about those, that is to say, those people or us, who give me, Krishna himself. So Krishna is clearly speaking in a dualistic sense, that there's Krishna himself, and there's everyone else, and those among everyone else who give their whole hearts to Krishna. Krishna confers the ability to understand beyond just worldly intellect. So far, so good. The power of discerning between the real and the not real. That's buddhi. The rest, from the standpoint of the accuracy of Sanskrit, is questionable. But certainly at the end, out of compassion, I choose to dwell in their hearts, and from there dispel the dark ignorance with the light of knowing. So far, so good. But wait a minute, that they are the divinity, with a capital D, within. So this is kind of a way of implying that Krishna chooses to enter into the hearts of beings who offer their love to him to help them realize that they are the person that they are offering their love to, or that we are all Krishna. Now, I don't know about you, but it seems to me that that just doesn't make an awful lot of sense. Because we have been reading about how Krishna is unique, or in Patanjali's words in his Yoga Sutras, Purusha Vishesha, a categorically different person from you and I. And here, it is saying that we are actually Krishna. So where does this kind of interpretive translation come from? What kind of thinking is this based on? So here's another edition of the Gita that I have here that has an introductory essay that explains a little bit about where this kind of thinking is coming from. So this edition of the Gita embraces an interpretation of the Gita based on what is popularly known as the perennial philosophy, a phrase made popular by Aldous Huxley. And here, the author is speaking about one of the tenets of absolute non-dualistic philosophy, the idea of a higher Brahman and a lower Brahman. So it says here, the personal Ishvara is responsible for the creation, preservation, and dissolution of the universe. The idea here is that the impersonal is not responsible for the creation of the universe, because the impersonal is an undifferentiated unity. There can't be anything separate, like a creation. The Supreme has two natures, the higher, para, and the lower, apara. The living souls represent the higher, and the material medium, the lower. Now this is interesting. What this is saying then is that the living souls, you and I, are a metaphor, which is to say we have no basis in reality. There's the glare in my glasses. We have no basis in reality. We are actually symbols for the higher nature. God is responsible for both the ideal plan and the concrete medium through which the ideal becomes actual. The conceptual becomes cosmic. The concretization of the conceptual plan requires a fullness of existence, an objectification in the medium of potential matter. Or in other words, God's concept or plan is dependent on the apara, or lower energy, namely the material world, which is kind of backwards from what we've heard so far, since Krishna has said quite clearly that everything emanates from him. The material world depends on him for its existence, not that he depends on the material world for anything, including whatever plans he has. While God's ideas are seeking for existence, why would God's ideas need to seek for existence? They would exist simply by virtue of them being his ideas. The world of existence is striving for perfection. I think all the evidence suggests quite the opposite. The divine pattern and the potential matter, both of these are derived from God, who is the beginning, middle, and end. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Anyway, this goes on to speak about how Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are actually all one. That is to say, there's no real difference between them. They can't separate them. They're all different manifestations of forms. And because forms only appear in the material world, technically these forms are actually also part of the inferior energy, or the idea of a form is in the category of ignorance. Therefore, the form of Krishna would also be something in the category of the material world. Anyway, he further goes on to say that Krishna, the teacher, insofar as the teaching of the Bhagavad-gita is concerned, it's immaterial whether Krishna is a historical individual or not, which is to say, Krishna is a representation of something beyond Krishna. So this is the kind of philosophical background that gives some credence to this idea that all of us are illusory. That is to say, we don't actually exist. We are illusory superimpositions on the ultimate reality of Brahman, and Krishna is a representative of that Brahman, and Brahman and Atma are identical, and therefore this is all about recognizing our identity as Brahman. So that's a couple of examples of what I believe are ways to misunderstand the Gita, this combination of mental speculation and interpretive translation. So we're going to look quickly at the verses from last week, compare them to what you just heard, and then move forward and see what the difference is between a direct interpretation or literal understanding that the verses mean exactly what they say, and the interpretive understanding, and see what the difference is and which makes more sense. And you can use your own good judgment as to what makes the most sense and just sort of feels right to you. So, beginning with verse number 8, Krishna speaking, I am the source of all. Everything emanates from me. Those who are wise, possessing perfect knowledge, serve me with devotion and worship me with all their heart, with their thoughts dwelling in me and every breath of life offered to me. Those who are devoted to me experience complete satisfaction and transcendental bliss by continually enlightening one another and speaking about me. Then verse 10, which is now begins the interpretive translation, or the alternative to the interpretive translation we heard a moment ago. To those who are always associating with me through offerings of devotional affection, I illuminate the path by which they can come to me. Feeling especially compassionate for those who are devoted to me, I, dwelling within their hearts, dispel the darkness born of ignorance with the radiant lamp of knowledge. As we have arrived at a point where ignorance is dispelled with the radiant lamp of knowledge that Krishna turns on from within, or that Krishna actually is from the position of revelation from within the heart of one who is devoted, I'm going to introduce a new invocation mantra that, as you will see in just a moment, is directly related to this idea of illumination of knowledge from within one's heart. And this is a theme that we find in the Vedic tradition, in the Upanishads. The Shvetasvatara Upanishad also offers up this idea that knowledge is illuminated from within one's heart for those who are devoted. So I'm going to chant each line. You will see now that this is a little more complex, 4 lines worth with quite a few extra diacritical marks to indicate pronunciation cues, but we are pretty far along in our classes, and I'm betting by now that you have become very excellent Sanskrit chanters. So I will explain the diacritics just to be sure that everybody's got a good sense of what they indicate. Chant 1 line at a time, and you can chant each line back. So the dot over the M in Om, indicating that the back of one's tongue lifts up to the back of the roof of one's mouth. At the same time, one's lips come together out in front. The tilde over the N is a nya sound, so it's kind of the back third of your tongue against the back third of the roof of your mouth. And when it comes after a J, the J takes on more of a G or a hard G sound, G. So this would be gya. The bar across the A or any other vowel indicates an open, long, elongated sound of that vowel. The apostrophe or accent mark over an S indicates an SH sound pronounced in the back of one's mouth, as opposed to a dot under an S, which is a higher pitched sh, regular SH sound. And the dot at the under an H at the end of a word that appears at the end of a line indicates that the vowel, a short version of the vowel, echoes back at the end. So I chant 1 line at a time, you chant back. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Dhyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I did forget to mention that C's in transliterated Sanskrit are always a CH sound. If you want a S sound, you get an S. If you want a K sound, you get a K. So the C is always a CH. The translation of this invocation mantra: I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my guru, to whom I respectfully bow, has illuminated my vision with the torchlight of knowledge. So as you see, the same theme. And the idea is that a guru is an external manifestation of the Paramatma, that is to say, the Supreme Person within one's heart appears outside one's heart as one's guru or spiritual teacher. And that's the idea there. And now we will move on to translation and commentary for our verses this evening. And if you have any questions about what we've spoken about so far, then please go ahead and pop them into the Q&A box. So I will read our verses for this evening, and I'm going to go 12 through 18 instead of just 12 through 16. So here we go. Starting with verse number 12. Arjuna said, "You are the supreme truth, the supreme abode, the supreme purifier, the eternal divine person, and the original divinity, unborn and all-powerful." Text 13. All the great seers, including the divine sage Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyasa, say this about you, and now you personally are affirming this truth to me. Text 14. O Keshava, I accept all that you have told me as the truth. O blessed Lord, neither the demigods nor the demons can comprehend your personality. Text 15. Indeed, you alone know yourself by your own power. O Supreme Person, you are the origin of all, the Lord of all beings, the Lord of all gods, and the Lord of the universe. Text 16. Please tell me in detail of your infinite divine powers and opulences through which you pervade and reside in all these worlds. Text 17. O Supreme Mystic, how shall I know you and constantly meditate upon you? What various states of being should I remember for the sake of meditating on you, O Lord? Text 18. O Janardana, please describe your magnificent mystic power in detail yet again, for there is no limit to my satisfaction in hearing the nectar of your words. We'll discuss a little bit about the name Janardana that Arjuna uses a couple of times in these verses. Meanwhile, back to our first verse. And this is the verse we will chant together. So this is the first time Arjuna is speaking since chapter 8, verse number 2. So it's been a little while. He's been having his mind blown by Krishna's revelation, and my mind is blown too. So once again, I think I covered all of the markings, diacritical marks in our invocation mantra. So I chant, you chant back. Arjuna uvacha Param Brahma Param Dhamma Pavitram Paramam Bhavan Purusham Shasvatam Divyam Adi Devam Ajam Vibhum. Translation once again. Arjuna said, you are the supreme truth, the supreme abode, the supreme purifier, the eternal, divine person, and the original divinity, unborn and all-powerful. All right, now I've gotten used to it. I'm going to leave them on. So let's take this verse apart a little bit and put it back together. The supreme truth translates the phrase Param Brahma. Param, supreme or paramount, Brahma. So Brahma indicates here Brahman, or the absolute truth. So the Supreme Lord is called Param Brahman, or the Supreme Brahman, because Krishna, the person, is superior to even Brahman, or the spiritual substratum that pervades all of existence, and which is entirely complete unto itself, and yet there is more. So Arjuna is calling Krishna not just you are Brahman, but you, Krishna, are Param Brahman, Para Brahman, beyond the spiritual stuff of which all things are made. And Krishna will affirm this as will confirm that he himself is the basis of Brahman. This idea is not just Arjuna's mental speculation, nor is it just that he's so impressed with what Krishna has had to say that he's bought it. There's other evidence, and Arjuna is about to reference that evidence. Meanwhile, just for our own edification, the Mundaka Upanishad, one of many Upanishads, that also offer a very similar assessment here. In this case, taking from this Upanishad, verse 329, one who realizes Krishna, Param Brahma, same phrase, is infused with awareness of Brahman, the spiritual substratum pervading all existence. So the idea here is that because Brahman is contained within Krishna, if you know Krishna, you know Brahman. However, it's not necessarily going to be the case that it's the other way around. If you know Brahman, well, beyond Brahman is Krishna, the personality of Godhead. So to know Krishna is to know Brahman, but to know Brahman is not necessarily to know Krishna. And to think of Brahman as the end-all and be-all may lead one to make the mistake of thinking that the form of Krishna, the personality of Krishna, is somehow or other in the category of lower Brahman or lower truth, apara, on account of thinking that form by definition means material form. But says who? We have already established that Krishna's form is spiritual, that there's no difference between Krishna and Krishna's form, as opposed to us, where there's a difference between us and our material bodies, because we are spiritual and our bodies are made of matter. Krishna is spiritual, and his body is made of spirit, not different from Krishna. No duality means there's no difference between Krishna and Krishna's form. So the idea that there's some loss of unity when we speak about the absolute truth having a form is not supported in the Bhagavad-gita. That's one of the things that makes Krishna or Ishvara a categorically different person, not different from his own form. So Brahman is absolute and non-dual. Therefore, if Krishna is Brahman, then Krishna cannot be some categorically different or lower version of Brahman, because the very idea that you can divide Brahman into a lower kind of truth and a higher kind of truth is a duality. It's part of the circular logic of impersonal or absolute non-dualistic philosophy. Because as soon as you say that there's a material world and then there's Brahman, and Brahman's not responsible for the creation of material world, therefore there has to be this personal God who does create the material world, well, now there's a duality. The other way to deal with this issue is you deny the reality of the material world altogether, which is actually Shankara's proposition in his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra, the idea that the world doesn't actually exist. It's an illusory superimposition on Brahman, which means we, as denizens of an illusion, do not actually exist, and therefore there's no possibility of our realizing that we are Brahman, or that we can realize anything else that's substantive, because we don't exist. And it's impossible for something that doesn't exist to realize anything. In which case, there's a gap. There's no way for us to get from where we are to a condition of self-realization, and it means Descartes is wrong. You can doubt your existence all you want, and it doesn't matter because the doubter doesn't exist. Anyway. So Krishna is transcendental and is therefore never subordinate to his own external or lower material energy. So the argument that Krishna is a lesser aspect of Brahman just flies directly in the face of Krishna's own statements about himself and about his relationship with his separated material energies. It also flies directly in the face of Arjuna's declaration, and as we're about to see, the statements of the great sages who have said the same thing about Krishna that Arjuna has just said. One last thing about this particular verse, the supreme purifier translates the phrase pavitram paramam, which also can be understood to mean the most sacred. So by associating with that which is sacred, we also awaken our own innate sacredness. And our sacredness becomes manifest. That is, we develop saintly or sacred qualities. So by meditating on Krishna, the mind becomes purified. And by cultivating feelings of devotion to Krishna through acts of devotional service, then our hearts become purified. Our actions become purified. Anything associated with the actions of devotional service becomes purified, which harkens back to a previous verse where Krishna describes how everything involved in an act of sacrifice becomes spiritualized or is Brahman, according to the intention of such a sacrifice. So moving on now to text 13, and let me know if you have any questions about text 12. All the great seers, including the divine sage Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyasa, say this about you, and you are now personally affirming this truth to me. So for those who are not familiar with the rest of the Vedic canon and the tradition in which the Bhagavad-gita appears, you may ask, well, who are these guys and why should I think that they know anything, that they are a reputable source of information about transcendental knowledge? So let's just take a quick look at who these personalities are. Here's a depiction of Narada, and he is a divine sage who can travel in space without a spacesuit, without a spaceship. This is a mystic power. Yogis who are super self-realized may have this capability. He is a divine sage, very unique sage, and the guru of Vyas, who is also mentioned in this same verse and who you may recognize a little bit later. So Narada can travel anywhere in this universe. He can also travel to the spiritual realm, and he is the author, or at least he is credited with authoring the Narada Bhakti Sutras, in which, in the chapter called Defining Bhakti, Narada tells us, pure devotional service is far superior to fruitive work, that is to say, karma kanda, or work that is meant to generate good karma. Philosophical speculation, jnana yoga, or the yoga of trying to understand the absolute by an intellectual breakthrough, and mystic meditation, that is to say, the yoga of eightfold mysticism, Patanjali's system. After all, bhakti is the fruit of all endeavor, which is to say that all other paths of yoga lead or find their ultimate resolution in bhakti. So they lead to bhakti, they find their ultimate fulfillment in bhakti, and one needs bhakti in order for them to work. So that's a little bit about who Narada is. Narada is a person who shows up at every opportune moment to deliver news, to offer a benediction, to give information about Krishna's pastimes, to key people at various points. He assists Krishna in his various pastimes by delivering the news when it's needed. Asita is the next sage, and there are many different references in both Vedic and Buddhist traditions about a sage named Asita, and I couldn't really authoritatively parse it out. So I don't really have a lot of information about Asita. And if you come up with any, please let me know. Devala is a great authority like Narada Muni and Vyasadeva. Go back. He was close to the Pandava family. Remember, Arjuna has 4 brothers collectively. They are known as the 5 Pandavas. And Devala was the elder brother of another sage named Dhaumya, who is the priest of the Pandava family. And Devala will counsel Arjuna's older brother, Yudhisthira, after the Battle of Kurukshetra concludes. So this will be beyond the pages of the Bhagavad-gita. And then you may recall Vyas or Vyasadeva, Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas. We saw Vyas show up as part of the backstory of the Bhagavad-gita. This was in all the way back in class number 2, as I described, how did we get here? How did we arrive at this point? So Vyas is considered to be the literary incarnation of Vishnu. He is the scribe of the Vedas. He is credited actually with recording the Bhagavad-gita and putting it in writing for us to study later in this particular season of time. And you see him pictured here with his guru, Narada. At a certain point, Vyasadeva expressed some dissatisfaction with all of the literature that he had compiled, and he wasn't really sure why he felt this dissatisfaction. Conveniently, right about that time, Narada, being kind of omniscient himself, showed up and explained to Vyas that the reason for his feeling of incompleteness is because he had not, even though he compiled all of this knowledge of the Vedas and the Upanishads and et cetera, he had not specifically described the attributes and activities and relationships of the Supreme Person, Krishna. And therefore, Narada instructed Vyas that if he were to put together a biography of the Supreme Person, then he would feel satisfied. This biography takes the form of the Srimad Bhagavatam. All right, any questions so far? Let me know. Meanwhile, we will move on to the next verse, verse 14. Arjuna continues, O Keshava, I accept all that you have told me as the truth. O blessed Lord, neither the demigods nor the demons can comprehend your personality. So if the demigods can't do it, then it certainly stands to reason that those possessed of a demonic mentality are also incapable. And based on what I shared with you earlier, it appears that the mental speculators and interpretive translators are also unable to comprehend the true nature of Krishna's personality. Here, Arjuna uses the name Keshava. And one of the commentators on the Bhagavad-gita, Baladev Vidyabhushana, indicates that the word Keshava can be broken up into 3 parts, indicating each of the 3 principal deities within the universe or the cosmic manifestation. K indicates Brahma, Sa indicates Shiva, and Va indicates Vishnu. And the idea of Keshava being all-inclusive is another way of stating a unity between the 3. However, in this case, all 3 are contained within Krishna, as opposed to all 3 are equal to or independent of Krishna. So that's the indication here. The word vyaktim has been translated here as personality. It also means revelation or manifestation. So neither the demigods nor the demons can understand the manifest revelation of Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. In other words, you see Krishna, you hear about Krishna, but you can't wrap your head around, or somehow or other, it just does not register that even though Krishna is presenting himself in fairly plain language as being the supreme person, it just bounces off. Someone commented earlier in our proceedings a few weeks ago, how is this a secret? When we spoke about how this is the most confidential knowledge. Somebody said, how is this a secret? It's just right there. Well, somehow or other, even though it's right there, any accurate translation of these words will say quite simply that Krishna is saying, I'm the supreme person and everything is resting in me and emanates from me. Still, somehow or other, people feel the need to spin some other understanding on these statements rather than simply accept the direct understanding or the self-evident meaning of the text. Who can understand these things? So here's a little bit from Ramanuja's commentary on this verse. Ramanuja, you may recall, is the acharya or spiritual exemplar of the Sri Sampradaya. The Sri Sampradaya is the school of thought represented in disciplic succession that Krishnamacharya, the great-grandfather of modern yoga, subscribed to. So in Ramanuja's commentary, he says, here Arjuna is asserting that all Lord Krishna is stating is absolutely factual and not any metaphorical description. This means that every word that Lord Krishna speaks is the absolute reality, and his extraordinary and infinite glories and illustrious qualities and phenomenal attributes are always manifest and eternal. Thus, Lord Krishna is known as Bhagavan, the complete possessor of the 6 opulences: total power, total beauty, total wisdom, total wealth, total fame, and total renunciation. Neither the Devas or the Davana, the demons, Danava, I should say, being of limited understanding, have the ability to understand him and perceive his full identity. In other words, it's impossible for the created to understand their creator. I suppose Mary Shelley might have some commentary on this as well. In addition, I will share with you the commentary from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami in his Bhagavad-gita as it is. By the grace of the Supreme Lord, Arjuna has understood that the supreme truth is Krishna and that he is the perfect one. One should therefore follow the path of Arjuna. He received the authority of Bhagavad-gita as described in the 4th chapter. The parampara system of disciplic succession for the understanding of Bhagavad-gita was lost, and therefore Krishna reestablished that disciplic succession with Arjuna because he considered Arjuna his intimate friend and a great devotee. So this is the recommended method of understanding Bhagavad-gita by entering into this system of disciplic succession, hearing from someone who has understood the Gita, and evidence of one's having understood the Gita from at least this standpoint is that one becomes a devotee of Krishna as per Krishna's recommendation, Manmana bhava mad bhakto, become my devotee, always be thinking of me, engage yourself in my service. So moving on to text number 15. Arjuna continues, indeed, you alone know yourself by your own power. O Supreme Person, you are the origin of all, the Lord of all beings, the Lord of all gods, and the Lord of the universe. So in this verse, Arjuna uses the phrase Purushottama. So Purushottama is a compound word consisting of Purusha, person, and Uttama, meaning ultimate. So the Purushottama, the ultimate person, or the greatest of all persons, another way of saying the supreme person. And here, Arjuna is confirming that Krishna is inconceivable to everyone but Krishna, which kind of makes a little bit of sense, that given the nature of who Krishna is, only Krishna himself can fully wrap his head around Krishna. Text number 16. Now here is where Arjuna makes his request. Up until now, in these verses that we've heard so far, these are statements of acceptance and glorification. Arjuna is in a way echoing back to Krishna what Krishna has told him in order to let Krishna know that he understands and accepts what Krishna has said. So now Krishna has heard, Arjuna understands what I'm telling him. And here, Arjuna will begin to make a request of Krishna, having established that he accepts Krishna's words, his statements about himself. Please tell me in detail of your infinite divine powers and opulences, through which you pervade and reside in all these worlds. So, a transcendental opulence indicates how Krishna is present, omnipresent, in so many different ways. Arjuna is asking Krishna to describe how we can see Krishna in the world, how he exhibits all of his divine powers and all of the attributes that Ramanuja spoke about previously. In other words, how do we get some indication in this world of Krishna's supreme power, supreme beauty, all pervasiveness, his supreme knowledge, etc. And he's asking Krishna because since Krishna is the only one that understands himself, well, Krishna alone is capable of really describing and elaborating on all of these different vibhutis or powers that he has. Since he's the only one who can display them, he's also the only one who can describe them. Which brings us to the next verse. O supreme mystic, how shall I know you and constantly meditate upon you? What various states of being should I remember for the sake of meditating on you, O Lord? So Krishna has made it very clear in these last 2 chapters that his advice is one should constantly remember him, fix one's mind in meditation on him. That he is both the ultimate object of meditation and the ultimate goal of meditation. So Arjuna says, okay, I accept. How do I do it? How shall I orient my mind towards you so that I can remain in a state of constant meditation and remembrance of you? So our illusion is this notion that somehow or other we are separate from Krishna, that we have some independent existence from the complete absolute truth. And this particular state of being is dispelled by engagement in devotional yoga, which begins with hearing, chanting, remembering, and serving. So what Arjuna is asking for are tips on how to hear about Krishna, how to speak about Krishna, how to remember and how to engage in service oriented towards Krishna. And Krishna himself is the ultimate authority on how you do that. Here's a little bit of Ramanuja's commentary on this verse. The Supreme Lord is endowed with the six opulences of total power, beauty, wisdom, fame, wealth, and renunciation, which accompany his illustrious attributes of omniscience, perfection, eternity, sovereignty, majesty, etc. So now Arjuna wants to know what other ways that Krishna hasn't described yet, by what other ways can one experience this majesty? Which brings us to our last verse of the evening. O Janardana, please describe your magnificent mystic power in detail yet again, for there is no limit to my satisfaction in hearing the nectar of your words. So Krishna has already spoken about himself for a while now. And so you may be wondering, well, why does Arjuna want to hear it again? Well, this is one of the interesting things about hearing about the name and form and qualities and activities of the absolute truth. Because they are transcendental and spiritual and unlimited, they are unlimitedly amazing and wonderful and far out. And as we develop a taste for hearing about Krishna, we find that too much is never enough, that we can always hear more, and it's eternally, perpetually more and more fascinating, because there's just no end to how amazing the Supreme Person is. And there's a certain quality to hearing, to Krishna's attributes that's just categorically different. Just as Krishna himself is categorically different, hearing about Krishna and all things connected to Krishna is categorically different from material topics about which we might hear or chant or remember or engage with in some way. So here's another meaning to the name Janardana. Ardana means one who is prayed to, and Jana means all people. So Janardana, understood a different way, is the one who is prayed to by all people. This has a connection to the other understanding of Janardana as indicating the triumvirate of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, all contained within Krishna, because people pray to Brahma, they pray to Shiva, they pray to Vishnu, and whatever particular form, Ishta Devata, whatever particular form of the Supreme one is attracted to, Krishna has said, ultimately, that's all rolling up to me. So all prayers, whether they be prayers for material benedictions from demigods or prayers for spiritual benefits from other aspects of the absolute truth, all of that ultimately rolls up to Krishna. Magnificent mystic power translates the phrase Atmano Yogam Vibhutim. So Vibhuti means mystic powers. The third chapter or pada of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras speaks about all the different mystic powers that one can acquire by virtue of mastery of different types of meditation. So Krishna's supreme yoga is the science of how the individual consciousness attains communion with the supreme consciousness or ultimate consciousness. So this is Krishna's ultimate yogic power, that he has the power to reveal himself to us and bring us into contact with him. Atmano Yogam and Vibhutim can also be translated separately as the science of this particular kind of yoga and majestic transcendental glories or opulences. Either way, Arjuna has now further endeared himself to Krishna by making this request. Krishna is actually really jazzed about when his devotees want to hear about him. And because our objective is to follow in Arjuna's footsteps, insofar as hearing the Bhagavad-gita and understanding the Bhagavad-gita in the same way that Arjuna has heard and understood it, we can also approach Krishna and endear ourselves to Krishna in precisely the same way by this act of submissive inquiry. This is also, you may recall, Krishna's recommendation as to how one should approach a spiritual teacher. That is to say, one who has seen the truth, a tattva darshina, by making submissive inquiries and offering service. Now, if the spiritual teacher or guru is understood to be an external manifestation of the Param Atma, the supreme person within one's heart, then it stands to reason that one would approach someone who we have accepted as a teacher of transcendental knowledge with the same kind of respect that one would give the Paramatma, since this is now the external representation of the Paramatma. And hence the Shvetasvatara Upanishad concludes with the idea that one who has equal faith in both the Supreme Lord and their spiritual teacher, to that person, the meaning of the Upanishad, that is, all the lessons that have just been given, will be illuminated from within one's heart. So, Krishna will now proceed to fulfill Arjuna's desire by speaking further about himself and giving information about how Arjuna will be able to remember him, meditate on him, be inspired to think of Krishna by seeing the different manifestations of Krishna's opulences in the world. And that brings us to the end of our class for this evening. And your last chance to ask questions on any of the verses and the commentary that we have discussed this evening. If you have no questions for now, but questions arise later, or if you are watching this after the fact, please direct your questions to me, Hari at Hari-kirtana.com. You can also, and I encourage you to, post questions, items for discussion, and various other possible understandings, realizations, etc. of these verses on our Facebook group. Next week, at least I got next week right, we will continue with the yoga of divine presence. We will get an indication from Krishna about his different opulences as per Arjuna's request. We will hear a who's who of Vedic celebrities, and I will do my best to provide you with an explanation as to who it is that Krishna is referring to in the upcoming verses. And we will talk about Vedic sacrifice in Kali Yuga, that is to say, in the particular season of time that we are currently experiencing. This will come up when Krishna describes how one can associate with him through various acts of sacrifice or yoga. So we'll cover verses 19 through 25. This is the first cluster of verses wherein Krishna responds to Arjuna's request. And that's all she wrote for this evening. You're very welcome, Terry. My pleasure. Thank you very much for being here. And the rest of you, thank you very much for spending your time with me. It's always a great honor to have you here with me, and a great pleasure for me to spend this time with you. I look forward to seeing you all next week when we resume our look at this 10th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita. Tess, you're very welcome. Nice to see you. All right. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time.